The silence in the conference room on the 45th floor was absolute. It was not a peaceful silence. It was the heavy and suffocating silence of a predator cornering its prey. Outside the floor-to-ceiling glass windows, the Atlanta skyline was just beginning to catch the morning sun, but inside, the air was frigid. I sat at the head of the black marble table. My hands were folded calmly on top of a leather file folder. I am Sloan King. At 34 years old, I am the lead forensic accountant for one of the most prestigious firms in the city. My job is not just math, it is an autopsy. I dissect the financial bodies of corrupt corporations to find the cancer. Today, the cancer was sitting directly across from me. His name was Marcus Henderson. He was the CEO of a logistics company that had reported record losses for 3 consecutive quarters. He was a man who was used to intimidating people. He was large and loud and accustomed to getting his way. Right now, however, he looked very small. He was sweating. A single bead of perspiration rolled down his temple and vanished into the collar of his expensive Italian shirt. I did not blink. I did not smile. I simply opened the folder in front of me. The sound of the paper turning was the only noise in the room. Mr. Henderson. I said, my voice soft but carrying a weight that made the junior executives in the room shift uncomfortably in their seats. You seem to labor under the misconception that forensic accounting is a passive profession. You think we simply look at the numbers you choose to show us. Henderson cleared his throat. He tried to summon his usual arrogance. Look here, Ms. King. We have been fully transparent. The market has been volatile. Shipping costs are up. I held up a hand. He stopped talking immediately. Please do not insult my intelligence with market trends, I said. I am not looking at the market. I am looking at your shell companies. Specifically, I am looking at a company registered in the Cayman Islands under the name Blue Horizon Logistics. The color drained from his face. It happened instantly. He went from flushed to a sickly shade of gray. I continued, my eyes locking onto his. You funneled $2,400,000 of company funds into Blue Horizon over the last 18 months. You listed these transactions as consulting fees for external risk assessment. I slid a single piece of paper across the long table. It stopped perfectly in front of him. However, I said, my voice dropping an octave. I did a little digging into Blue Horizon. It turns out the company has no employees. It has no office. It has no website. What it does have is a direct wire transfer link to a private bank account in your wife's name, and it also has a purchase order for a 6-bedroom villa in Tuscany. The room was frozen. The board members turned to look at their CEO with expressions of horror and rage. Henderson opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came out. He was finished. I had dismantled his entire life in under 5 minutes without raising my voice. This was who I was. I was a hunter. I used data as a weapon. I was untouchable. And then my wrist vibrated. It was a sharp, insistent buzz from my Apple Watch. In a meeting like this, I would usually ignore it. My phone was on Do Not Disturb. Only emergency notifications could get through. My heart gave a small, habitual jump. An emergency notification meant something was wrong. It meant life or death. I glanced down at the small screen expecting to see a hospital alert or a security breach at my firm. Instead, I saw a fraud alert from Chase Sapphire. The text was bright and clear against the black background. Transaction declined. Amount $13,700. Merchant Royal Caribbean Cruises. I stared at the watch. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. $13,700. For a split second, my brain tried to make sense of it. I thought perhaps my card had been cloned. I thought perhaps a hacker in Russia had stolen my identity. But then I looked at the card ending number listed in the alert. It was not my primary card. It was the supplemental card, the emergency card, the card I had given to my mother Rosanda and my father Elvin 3 years ago. I remembered the day I gave it to them. I had sat them down in my kitchen. I had explained it very clearly. This card is for life or death emergencies only. If someone is in the hospital, you use this. If the house is burning down, you use this. It is a safety net. It is not for spending. They had nodded solemnly. They had promised. And now here I was, sitting in a boardroom, having just exposed a man for embezzlement and theft. I was the picture of power and competence. I was the woman who terrified CEOs. And yet my own family was stealing from me Royal Caribbean cruises. They were not in the hospital. They were not in a crisis. They were trying to book a luxury vacation. They were trying to spend nearly $14,000 of my hard-earned money on a boat ride while I was sitting here working. The irony was a physical blow. I looked up from my watch. Mr. Henderson was still stammering, trying to find a lie to save himself. The board members were shouting questions. The chaos of the room felt distant and muffled. My blood ran cold. It was a different kind of cold than the professional detachment I used for my job. This was personal. This was the icy clarity of a woman who realizes she has been playing the fool. I stood up. The movement was so abrupt that the room went silent again. I smoothed the front of my jacket. "Gentlemen," I said, my voice steady despite the rage burning in my chest, "you have everything you need to proceed with legal action against Mr. Henderson. My report is comprehensive. If you will excuse me, I have a pressing matter to attend to." I did not wait for their permission. I did not wait for their thanks. I turned and walked out of the glass doors, my heels clicking sharp and fast on the floor. I walked past the receptionist. I walked to the elevator. I pressed the button for the lobby. My hand was shaking slightly. Not from fear, from fury. They thought I was a resource. They thought I was an unending well of cash they could draw from whenever they felt they deserved a treat. They thought I was stupid. The elevator doors slid open. I stepped inside and the heavy doors closed, sealing me in. I pulled my phone from my pocket. I looked at the notification again. $13,700. They had tried to steal $14,000. And when the card declined, they didn't call me to apologize. They didn't call to explain. I scrolled to my recent calls. There were no missed calls from them. They were probably scrambling, trying to figure out why the magic plastic rectangle had stopped working. I dialed my mother's number. I did not rehearse what I was going to say. I did not need to. The forensic accountant in me had taken over. I had found the fraud. Now it was time to confront the thief. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. I stood in the corner of the lobby where the marble walls met a floor-to-ceiling glass pane. The hustle of the building continued behind me. Junior associates were rushing to fetch lunch. Clients were shaking hands. The world was turning as if nothing had happened. But my world had stopped. My world had frozen into a single block of ice. "Hello?" My mother's voice was bright. It was chirpy. It was the voice of a woman without a care in the world. Behind her, I could hear the distinct roar of a busy terminal. There was the murmur of hundreds of people. There was the chime of a public address system announcing a gate change for a flight to Miami. "Mom," I said. My voice was low. It was tight. I did not waste time with pleasantries. I did not ask how she was. I went straight to the wound. I just got a notification from Chase Sapphire. There is a charge for $13,700 to Royal Caribbean Cruises. There was a pause on the other end. It was not a pause of guilt. It was the pause of someone who is annoyed that their vacation vibe is being interrupted by reality. "Oh, that." Rosanda let out a little laugh, a dismissive, airy sound. "I was going to call you later when we settled in. The service here at the airport is terrible." "You were going to call me later," I repeated. I stared at my reflection in the glass. My face was pale. My eyes were dark. "You charged $14,000 to an emergency credit card for a cruise." "Mom, that card is for hospitals. It is for fires. It is not for luxury vacations." Sloane stopped being so dramatic. Her tone shifted instantly. It went from cheerful to sharp. She was the victim now. She was the mother being harassed by her ungrateful daughter. It is not just a vacation. It is an intervention. An intervention, yes, for your sister. Bianca and Darius have been having such a hard time lately. You know how stressful Darius is, job search has been. They need this. They need to reconnect. They need to heat up their relationship before it falls apart. I gripped the phone tighter. My knuckles turned white. "So I am paying $13,700 so my sister and her unemployed husband can have a second honeymoon." "You make 6 figures, Sloane," Rosanda snapped. "You sit in that fancy air-conditioned office all day looking at spreadsheets. You have no idea what real stress is. You have no idea what it is like to struggle." Bianca is sensitive. She needs this luxury to feel like herself again. She paused to take a breath, but she did not let me speak. She plowed forward with the entitlement of a queen. Besides, you never go anywhere. That card just sits there collecting dust. It is wasteful. You are hoarding all that credit while your family suffers. We are just putting it to good use. Think of it as a gift, a thank you to us for raising you. A gift. Theft was now a gift. I listened to her logic twist and turn like a snake eating its own tail. She truly believed this. She believed that my money was her money. She believed that my success existed solely to fund Bianca's failures. Then I heard it. The background noise shifted. The phone must have been pulled away from her ear for a second. I heard a laugh. It was a high-pitched cackle that I recognized instantly. It was Bianca. "Who is it, Mom?" Bianca's voice drifted through the speaker. "Is it Sloane? Is she crying about her precious money?" "Tell her to relax," Darius boomed. His voice was deep and arrogant. "Tell her we will buy her a souvenir, maybe a magnet or a t-shirt if she is lucky." They both laughed. It was the sound of pure, unadulterated disrespect. They were standing there in the airport, surrounded by luggage that I had likely paid for at some point, preparing to board a ship I was financing, and they were mocking me. They were laughing at the bank. They did not think I was a person. They thought I was a resource. They thought I was a faucet that they could turn on and off at will. "Sloane, are you there?" Rosanda asked, returning to the phone. "Look, we are boarding now. Do not do anything stupid. Just pay the bill. You will not even miss it. You have plenty. We will send you pictures." I did not scream. The scream died in my throat. It was suffocated by a cold, hard realization. There was no point in screaming. Screaming is for people who want to be heard. Screaming is a plea for understanding. I realized in that moment that they would never understand. They did not want to understand. They only wanted to take. If I screamed, they would just call me hysterical. If I cried, they would call me weak. If I argued, they would call me selfish. There was only one language they understood. It was the language of consequences. "Enjoy your trip, Mom," I said. My voice was a flat line. It was devoid of emotion. It was dead. I hung up the phone. I stood there for a long moment listening to the silence of the lobby. The anger that had been burning hot in my chest moments ago had vanished. In its place was something else, something heavy and solid. It felt like a stone in my stomach. It was the end. I looked at the phone in my hand. I looked at the contact photo for my mother. It was a picture of us from 5 years ago. We were smiling. I pressed the delete button. I turned and walked toward the elevators, but I did not go up to my office. I did not go back to the meeting. I did not go back to my career as a forensic accountant. Not today. Today I had a different job. I walked past the security desk and out the revolving doors into the humid Atlanta afternoon. The city noise washed over me, but I barely heard it. My mind was already 3 steps ahead. I walked to the parking garage. My heels clicked a rhythmic beat on the concrete. I found my car. I got in. I sat in the driver's seat and placed my hands on the steering wheel. They were on a plane. They were trapped in a metal tube, hurtling toward the ocean. They were cut off from the world. They were vulnerable. And I was here. I was angry. And I had access to everything. I started the engine. The car roared to life. I pulled out of the parking spot and drove toward the exit. I did not turn toward my apartment. I turned toward the suburbs. I turned toward the house on Maple Drive. The house I bought. The house they lived in. The war had started. And they had fired the first shot without realizing that I was the one holding the nuclear codes. The drive from the gleaming steel canyon of downtown Atlanta to the rolling green suburbs usually took 40 minutes. Today, I made it in 25. My Mercedes was a capsule of silence. I did not listen to music. I did not listen to a podcast. I listened to the roar of my own blood rushing in my ears. I gripped the leather steering wheel with hands that were steady but cold. I turned onto Maple Drive. It was a street lined with old oak trees and manicured lawns. It was the kind of neighborhood people moved to when they wanted to signal to the world that they had made it. I had bought the house at number 124 3 years ago. It was a brick colonial with 4 bedrooms and a wraparound porch. I bought it with the bonus check from the biggest case of my career. I bought it because my father Elvin had just retired and my mother Rosanda was complaining about their apartment being too small. I bought it because I was still trying to buy their love. I pulled into the driveway. The sight that greeted me was a physical blow. The grass, which I paid a landscaping service $200 a month to maintain, was overgrown and choked with weeds. There were 3 trash cans overflowing at the curb, even though trash pickup was not until Friday. A rusted bicycle that belonged to no one I knew lay on its side in the middle of the walkway. I stepped out of the car. The heat of the Georgia afternoon pressed against my suit, but the chill inside me was absolute. I walked up the front steps. The white paint on the railing was chipping. There were dark, circular stains on the porch wood where wet glasses had been left to rot the timber. I unlocked the front door. The key turned with a stiff resistance, as if the house itself was ashamed to let me in. I pushed the door open, and the smell hit me like a physical slap. It was a thick and cloying scent. It was the smell of stale pizza grease mixed with damp mildew. It was the smell of unwashed bodies and that cheap floral air freshener my mother used to mask the scent of her own negligence. It smelled like a fraternity house after a long weekend bender. It did not smell like a home. It smelled like a host body that was being consumed by parasites. I stepped into the foyer. My heels clicked on the hardwood floor. I had paid $6,000 to have these floors refinished before they moved in. Now they were scuffed and dull. There was a sticky residue on the floorboards that made my shoes tack with every step. I walked into the living room. The sight made my forensic accountant brain recoil. It was chaos, absolute chaotic disrespect. The centerpiece of the room was the 85-inch Sony television I had bought them for Christmas. It was mounted on the wall, but it was crooked. Below it, my brother-in-law Darius had set up his gaming command center. There were wires snake-like and tangled running everywhere. I looked closer at the wall behind the television. My breath caught in my throat. There were holes, massive jagged holes in the drywall. It looked as if someone had taken a hammer to the sheetrock. I realized with a surge of fury that Darius had tried to mount his surround sound speakers. He had not used a stud finder. He had not used anchors. He had simply drilled and drilled until he found something solid. I walked up to the wall and ran my finger over the damage. He had bored directly into the main load-bearing beam of the house. There were spiderweb cracks radiating out from the impact site. He had compromised the structural integrity of the wall just so he could hear his video games louder. He was a 35-year-old man who had never held a job for longer than 6 months. He spent his days playing soldier in a digital world while he destroyed the real world I had built for him. I turned away from the wall and looked at the rest of the room. There were pizza boxes stacked like the Leaning Tower of Pisa on the coffee table. There were half-empty soda cans leaving rings on the antique side tables I had sourced from an estate sale in Savannah. I felt a memory clawing its way up from the back of my mind. I was 18 years old. I was standing in the kitchen of our old apartment. I had just been accepted to Spelman College. It was my dream. I needed a $500 deposit to secure my housing. "I am sorry, Sloan," my father Elvin had said. He did not look up from his newspaper. "We just do not have it. You are an adult now. You need to figure these things out on your own. Sink or swim, baby girl." 2 days later, I came home from my double shift at the diner to find Bianca screaming with joy in the driveway. They had bought her a car. It was a used Honda, but it was new to her. It cost $4,000. "She needs it for her image," Elvin had told me when I asked about the money. "She is delicate, Sloan. You are strong. You can take the bus. Bianca is a princess. She needs to be protected." I swam. I swam so hard my lungs burned. I worked 3 jobs. I graduated with honors. I built a career. I bought this house. And now the princess and her court were living in my house, rent-free and tearing it down brick by brick. I walked past the kitchen. The sink was piled high with dishes that had been there so long the food was crusted and black. The granite countertops were invisible beneath a layer of mail and magazines and empty takeout containers. I headed down the hallway to the master bedroom. This was supposed to be my parents' room, but I knew Bianca and Darius had taken over the second largest room down the hall. I pushed open the door to Bianca's room. It looked like a department store had exploded. Clothes were everywhere. They were draped over the chair. They were piled on the bed. They were scattered on the floor. I picked up a silk blouse that was lying in a heap near the door. It was Gucci. I checked the tag. It was real. I kicked a pile of shoes aside. Red bottom heels, Louboutin, $600 a pair minimum. I opened the closet. It was stuffed to bursting. There were bags from Saks Fifth Avenue. There were boxes from Neiman Marcus. There were things with the price tag still on them. I stood there holding a $1,200 handbag that still had the tissue paper inside. My mother's voice echoed in my head from the phone call an hour ago. Bianca is struggling. Darius is having a hard time. They need this vacation. Struggling. This was not the room of a woman who was struggling. This was the room of a woman who had a shopping addiction and a sister she treated like an infinite bank account. She claimed she could not afford groceries. She claimed she could not afford gas. She cried to me last month that she needed money for a dentist appointment because her tooth hurt. I gave her $500. There was no dentist receipt on the dresser. There was a receipt for a spa day at the St. Regis. The rage that had been a cold knot in my stomach began to expand. It filled my chest. It filled my throat. It was hot and suffocating. I dropped the handbag on the floor. I walked over to the corner of the room where Darius kept his things. There was a stack of papers shoved haphazardly under a pile of comic books. I moved the comics aside. I picked up the papers. It was a letter from a collection agency. It was addressed to Elvin Jenkins, my father. But the debt listed was for a credit card I knew my father did not have. It was a credit card with a $20,000 limit. I flipped through the pages. The charges were all for electronics, gaming consoles, speakers, drones, Darius. He had stolen my father's identity. He had opened credit cards in an old man's name and maxed them out. And my father either did not know or he was too weak to stop it. I looked around the room again, the luxury, the waste, the destruction. They were not just ungrateful. They were criminals. They were looting my life and the lives of anyone foolish enough to love them. I walked back out into the hallway. I stood in the center of the house I owned. I listened to the silence. It was the silence of a crime scene. They had killed the home I tried to give them. They had murdered my generosity. I took my phone out of my pocket. I took a photo of the hole in the living room wall. I took a photo of the mountain of trash in the kitchen. I took a photo of the hoard of designer clothes in the bedroom. I needed evidence. I needed to document the state of the asset. Because this was no longer a home. This was a distressed asset. And I knew exactly how to handle a distressed asset. You liquidate it. I walked to the front door. I stepped out onto the porch and pulled the door shut. I locked it. I walked down the steps to my car. I did not look back at the house. I did not look at the overgrown lawn. I got into my car and started the engine. The powerful motor purred. It was a clean mechanical sound. It was the sound of order. I pulled my phone out again. I scrolled through my contacts until I found the number I needed. It was a number I kept for extreme situations. It was the number of a man named Kingston Price. He was a real estate investor. He was known in Atlanta as the Shark. He bought properties for cash. He bought them fast. And he did not care about the condition. He bought the land. He bought the dirt. I dialed the number. It rang once. Kingston speaking. His voice was rough like sandpaper on concrete. Kingston, this is Sloan King. Sloan, to what do I owe the pleasure? You usually only call me when you have a forensic audit you need help decoding. Not today, Kingston. Today I have a deal for you. I am listening. I have a property in the suburbs, 4-bedroom colonial, half-acre lot, appraised at $600,000. I know the area. Good dirt. What is the catch? I want to sell it. Today. Cash. Kingston paused. I could hear him shifting in his chair. How much? $450,000. That is a steep discount, Sloan. Is the foundation cracked? Is it haunted? The foundation is fine, I said. But it comes with a condition. A non-negotiable condition. Name it. I want it demolished. There was a silence on the other line. A long, heavy silence. You want me to tear it down? Immediately, I said. I want it gone. I want the earth salted. I want nothing left but the red Georgia clay. Kingston laughed. It was a low, dark sound. You are a scary woman, Sloan. Can you do it? I can have a crew there tomorrow morning. but I need the paperwork signed today. Meet me at the property in an hour, I said. Bring the check. I hung up the phone. I looked at the house one last time through the windshield. It looked innocent in the afternoon sun. It looked like the American dream. It was a lie. It was a prison I had built for myself out of guilt and obligation, and tomorrow I was going to blow it up. I put the car in drive and pulled away from the curb. I left the trash cans. I left the rusted bicycle. I left the ghost of the daughter who just wanted to be loved. She was gone. The predator had taken her place. The air in the hallway felt heavy and stagnant, but it was nothing compared to the atmosphere inside the room at the end of the corridor. This was the room Darius called his office. He liked to tell people he was a freelance consultant or a digital entrepreneur, but in reality, he was a man who spent his days in a bathrobe arguing with teenagers on the internet. I pushed the door open. The hinges whined in protest. The smell was immediate and offensive. It was the scent of a teenage boy's bedroom amplified by the musk of a grown man who refused to open a window. It smelled of stale corn chips and old energy drinks, and a distinct underlying note of unwashed laundry. I stepped inside, and my heels sank into a pile of discarded clothes. I kicked a pair of sweatpants aside with the toe of my Italian leather pump. I was not here to clean. I was here to liquidate. I needed the title to his car. It was a flashy muscle car, a Dodge Charger, that he had insisted on buying 2 years ago, despite having no income. I had co-signed the loan because my mother had cried about how he needed reliable transportation to get to job interviews. He had never gone to a single interview. The car sat in the driveway gathering pollen and depreciating in value every single day. I was going to sell it. I was going to sell everything. I walked to the desk in the corner. It was a cheap particle board table that was bowing under the weight of 3 computer monitors and a tower of empty soda cans. I started sifting through the mess. There were crumpled receipts for fast food. There were sketches of terrible logo designs for businesses that did not exist. There were rejection letters from banks for loans he had tried to apply for in his own name. I opened the top drawer. It was filled with tangled charging cables and loose change. I opened the second drawer. It contained a stash of candy bars and a gaming controller. I slammed it shut. I needed the paperwork. I looked around the room. In the corner, there was a milk crate overflowing with comic books. Darius was obsessed with them. He treated them like holy relics. I knelt down beside the crate. I started pulling out the comics, looking for a folder or an envelope. I moved a stack of vintage Marvel issues, and my hand brushed against something that felt different. It was a manila folder shoved flat against the bottom of the crate beneath the weight of his adolescent fantasies. It was hidden, deliberately. I pulled it out. It was heavy. I opened the folder on the floor. I expected to find maybe a stash of cash or perhaps some embarrassing photos. I did not expect to find a legal strategy. The first document was a printout from a legal advice website. The header read, "Understanding Adverse Possession in the State of Georgia." I froze. I sat there on the dirty carpet in my tailored suit and stared at the words. Adverse possession. It is a legal concept often called squatter's rights. It allows a person to claim ownership of land owned by another person if they occupy it openly and notoriously for a certain period of time without the owner's permission. I flipped the page. There were highlighted sections. The time frames were circled in red ink. 7 years with color of title. 20 years without. And then I saw the handwriting. It was in the margins. It was a loopy, cursive script that I had known my entire life. It was my mother, Rosanda. She had written notes, detailed notes. Keep utility bills in our name to prove residency. Make sure mail is delivered here. Do not sign any lease agreements. If she tries to kick us out, claim we have an oral contract for ownership. My breath caught in my throat. I felt a physical pain in my chest, a sharp constriction of my heart. This was not just Darius being a leech. This was a conspiracy. My mother was not just enabling him, she was plotting with him. They were calculating the exact date they could steal my house from me. They were living here rent-free, eating my food, spending my money, and counting down the days until they could legally rob me of the roof over their heads. I flipped to the next document. It was a draft of an affidavit, a sworn statement prepared for a future court date. It claimed that I had abandoned the property. It claimed that they had been the sole caretakers and financial providers for the home. It was a lie, a bold and documentable lie, but they were preparing to tell it under oath. They were wolves. I had invited them in, I had fed them, and they were waiting for me to fall asleep so they could eat me whole. I felt a coldness spread through my veins. It replaced the shock. It replaced the hurt. It was the icy detachment of the forensic accountant. I was no longer a daughter discovering a betrayal. I was an investigator discovering a crime. I reached back into the folder. There was a second section separated by a paperclip. These documents looked different. They were on thinner paper. They were letters from a financial institution called Apex Holdings. I unfolded the first letter. It was a final notice for a high-interest personal loan. The amount due was $12,000. The interest rate was predatory at 28%. I looked at the name on the account, Elvin Jenkins, my father. I frowned. Elvin did not take out loans. Elvin was terrified of debt. He had lived on a cash basis ever since a bankruptcy in the 90s scared him straight. He did not even have a credit card until I gave him the emergency one. I looked at the date on the letter. It was from 3 months ago. I looked at the application details attached to the notice. The email address listed for the applicant was not my father's email. It was dariustheking@gmail.com. Darius. I flipped through the rest of the stack. There were more letters: quick cash, speedy loans, title pawn. All of them were in the name of Elvin Jenkins. All of them were linked to Darius's email address or phone number. All of them were in default. Darius had stolen my father's identity. He had used my father's social security number and his clean credit history to open lines of credit with the shadiest lenders in the state. He had maxed them out and then hidden the notices. I looked at the total amount. It was staggering. $40,000 in high-interest debt. And my father did not know. Elvin was walking around thinking he was enjoying his retirement while his son-in-law was methodically destroying his financial existence. My mother knew about the house plot. Her handwriting was on the adverse possession papers. But did she know about this? Did she know her golden son-in-law was cannibalizing her husband? I stared at the papers. The disgust rose in my throat like bile. They were not just lazy, they were malignant. They were a cancer. They had looked at my generosity and seen weakness. They had looked at my father's trust and seen an opportunity. They were parasites. A parasite does not care if the host dies. A parasite only cares about feeding itself. They were willing to kill my financial future. They were willing to destroy my father's good name. They were willing to steal my home, and they felt entitled to it. They felt they deserved it. I pulled my phone from my pocket. My hand was steady. I opened the camera app. I switched to document mode. I took a photo of the adverse possession article with my mother's handwriting. Click. I took a photo of the affidavit. Click. I took a photo of the loan documents from Apex Holdings. Click. I took a photo of the fraudulent application with Darius's email address. Click. I photographed every single page. I captured every lie. I secured every piece of evidence. I put the papers back into the folder. I slid the folder back into the bottom of the crate. I piled the comic books back on top of it. I arranged them exactly as they had been, the amazing Spider-Man on top. I stood up. I brushed the dust from the knees of my trousers. I looked around the room one last time. It did not look like a messy bedroom anymore. It looked like a crime scene, and I was the lead investigator. They thought they were playing a long game. They thought they had years to execute their plan. They thought I was the clueless Mark who just paid the bills and looked the other way. They were wrong. I walked out of the room and closed the door softly behind me. The click of the latch sounded like the cocking of a gun. I walked down the hallway toward the kitchen. My mind was racing. I was calculating. I was strategizing. They wanted a war for this house. They wanted to use the law to take it from me. I smiled. It was a cold, terrifying smile that no one was there to see. I knew the law better than they did. I knew numbers better than they did. And I had something they did not have. I had the deed. And I had a buyer. I picked up my phone and dialed my attorney. It was time to sell the farm, and I was going to burn the fields before I left. I walked out of the bedroom and closed the door on the evidence of my family's betrayal. The air in the hallway felt suffocating. I needed to breathe, but more than that, I needed to act. I pulled my phone from my pocket. My hands were steady. The rage that had threatened to consume me earlier had crystallized into a cold and singular purpose. I was not going to argue with them. I was not going to negotiate. I was going to execute. I dialed Jessica, my attorney, first. She picked up on the second ring. "Jessica," I said, my voice clipping through the silence of the empty house. "I need you to draft a bill of sale. Immediate transfer of title. Cash deal. No contingencies." Jessica paused. I could hear the click of her keyboard in the background. "Sloan, what is going on? You just bought that house 3 years ago. I am selling it, Jessica. Today. I need you to have the paperwork ready to be signed electronically within the hour. I will send you the buyer details shortly." I hung up before she could ask why. I did not have time for explanations. I scrolled through my contacts until I found the name I was looking for: Kingston Price. Kingston was a legend in Atlanta real estate circles. He was not a developer who cared about community or heritage. He was a shark. He bought distressed properties for cash. He bulldozed them. He built high-density luxury condos in their place. He was ruthless. He was efficient. And right now, he was exactly the weapon I needed. I pressed call. "Kingston speaking." His voice was deep and rough like gravel rolling in a cement mixer. "Kingston, this is Sloan King." "Sloan, to what do I owe the pleasure? You usually only call me when you have a forensic audit that needs a second set of eyes. Not today, Kingston. Today I have a deal for you. I am listening. I have a property in the Cascade area, 4-bedroom colonial, half-acre lot, appraised at $600,000. I know you have been trying to get a foothold on Maple Drive for your new townhouse project." I could practically hear his ears perk up. "I know the area. Good dirt. What is the catch? I want to sell it. Today. Cash." Kingston laughed, a dry, raspy sound. "You are selling your parents' house, the one you are always complaining about. I am selling my house, Kingston. My name is on the deed. And yes, I am selling it. Are you interested? I am always interested in good dirt, Sloan. But if you need to sell today, that tells me you are desperate. And desperation comes with a discount. Meet me at the property in 45 minutes. Bring a check." I hung up. I walked to the kitchen and poured the rest of the stale coffee down the drain. I washed the mug and placed it in the dishwasher. I wiped the counter. I was preparing the stage. 40 minutes later, a matte black Mercedes G-Wagon pulled into the driveway. It looked aggressive against the backdrop of the overgrown lawn and the white picket fence. Kingston Price stepped out. He was a tall man with skin the color of deep mahogany and a shaved head. He wore a bespoke suit that cost more than the Honda my parents had bought for Bianca. He did not look like a neighbor. He looked like an acquisition merger in human form. I stepped out onto the porch to meet him. "Sloan," he said, nodding his head. He did not offer a hand. He was looking past me at the peeling paint on the porch railing. "Kingston, come inside." We walked into the foyer. I watched his eyes. He did not look at the architecture. He did not look at the crown molding I had paid thousands to install. He looked at the scuff marks on the floor. He looked at the water stain on the ceiling where the upstairs bathroom had leaked last year. He walked into the living room and saw the hole Darius had drilled into the load-bearing wall. He let out a low whistle. "Structural damage," he said, pointing at the cracks in the drywall. "That is going to be expensive to fix. And the smell." He wrinkled his nose. "It smells like a locker room in here." He walked through the kitchen, kicking a pile of trash aside with his Italian leather loafer. He opened the back door and looked at the yard. "It is a mess, Sloan," he said, turning back to me. "The bones are good, but this house has been abused. You have squatters." "I had family," I corrected him. "But yes, it has been abused." He crossed his arms and leaned against the granite island. "So you want to sell today?" "As is. With all this junk inside." "As is," I confirmed. "I want to walk away with a check and never look back." Kingston tapped his chin. "Market value is $600,000. But with the condition of the interior and the structural issues and the speed you require, I cannot give you market value. I have to gut this place. I have to rezone it. It is a risk. Give me a number, Kingston. $400,000. I did not flinch. That was $200,000 less than it was worth. It was a massive financial hit. My forensic accountant brain screamed at the loss, but my heart, the part of me that wanted to sever the tie to the people who had bled me dry, beat steady and strong. $450,000, I countered. And I leave everything. You deal with the trash. You deal with the furniture. You deal with whatever they left behind. Kingston narrowed his eyes. He was calculating margins. He was calculating demolition costs. $425,000. And we close right now. $440,000, I said. But it comes with a condition, a non-negotiable clause that must be added to the contract. Kingston raised an eyebrow. A condition. Usually when people sell fast, they do not make demands. What is it? I want it demolished, I said. The room went silent. Kingston stared at me. He looked for a trace of a joke in my eyes. He found none. Excuse me, he said. I want it gone, Kingston. I do not want you to renovate it. I do not want you to flip it. I want you to bring a bulldozer here tomorrow morning. I want this house wiped from the face of the earth within 48 hours. He looked at me with a new expression. It was not the look of a shark looking at prey. It was the look of a shark recognizing another shark. He saw the coldness in my eyes. He saw the absolute lack of sentimentality. He realized that this was not a financial transaction. This was an execution. You want me to level it? He asked slowly. To the foundation, I said. I want nothing left but the red Georgia clay. Can you do it? A slow grin spread across his face. It was a terrifying smile. I have a demolition crew that owes me a favor. I can have the heavy machinery here by sunrise. Then we have a deal. $440,000. Demolition begins tomorrow. Kingston reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a checkbook. He did not hesitate. He walked out the front door, and I followed him. He placed the checkbook on the hood of his G-Wagon. The metal was hot from the engine. He uncapped a fountain pen. "This is ruthless, Sloan," he said as he wrote. "Even for you." "They stole $13,000 from me," I said, watching the ink flow onto the paper. "They tried to steal the deed through adverse possession." "They stole my father's identity." Kingston paused, his pen hovering over the signature line. He looked up at me. "Adverse possession." "Yes." He shook his head and finished signing. He ripped the check from the book with a sharp sound. They picked the wrong target. He handed me the check. $440,000. It was a fortune to most people. To me, it was the price of my freedom. I pulled up the contract Jessica had emailed to my phone. I forwarded it to Kingston. He signed it digitally on his phone right there in the driveway. I countersigned. The notification popped up on my screen. Transaction complete. Title transfer pending. It was done. The house was no longer mine. It belonged to Kingston Price. It belonged to the bulldozer. I looked at the house one last time. I looked at the window of the room where I had slept when I visited. I looked at the porch where my mother used to sit and judge the neighbors. It looked like a corpse. "It is all yours, Kingston," I said. He pocketed his phone. "Get your car out of the driveway, Sloan. The fencing crew will be here in 2 hours. I am locking this place down. If your family tries to come back tonight, they are going to find a fortress." "That is exactly what I want," I said. I walked to my car. I opened the door and slid into the driver's seat. I placed the check on the passenger seat. I started the engine. I felt lighter. The heavy weight that had been pressing on my chest for years was gone. I backed out of the driveway. I watched Kingston walking toward the house like a general surveying a battlefield. I did not feel sad. I did not feel regret. I felt powerful. I shifted the car into drive and sped away from Maple Drive. I left the memories. I left the guilt. I left the house. And tomorrow morning, my family would come home to a pile of rubble. The white vans arrived in a convoy. They looked like ambulances coming to collect the dead, but they were actually industrial cleaning crews coming to collect the debris of my family, is life. The lead driver was a man named Alvarez. He looked at the overgrown lawn and the peeling paint of the house with the practiced eye of a man who specialized in disasters. I stood on the porch with my arms crossed. I did not feel sentimental. I felt like a surgeon preparing to cut out a tumor. Alvarez walked up the steps holding a clipboard. He asked me what the protocol was. He wanted to know what to keep and what to pack. I looked him in the eye. I told him there was no packing. I told him that if it was not nailed down, it was leaving. I told him that if it could be sold, it went to the front lawn. I told him that everything else went into the dumpster that was currently being backed into the driveway with a deafening beep. The crew moved with the efficiency of locusts. They swarmed the house. I watched them carry out the physical manifestations of my family's entitlement. They hauled out the leather sofa where Darius had spent years ignoring job applications. They dragged out the mattress where my parents had slept soundly while plotting to steal my deed. They carried out armfuls of Bianca's clothes. It was a purge. It was violent, and it was loud, and it was absolutely necessary. I directed them to pile the sellable items on the grass near the sidewalk. I wanted a spectacle. I did not want a quiet estate sale behind closed doors. I wanted a public liquidation. Darius's sneaker collection came out first. He treated those shoes like religious artifacts. There were limited edition Jordans and pristine Yeezys that had never touched pavement. He kept them in clear plastic boxes to protect them from dust. I watched a worker dump them onto the grass in a heap. The plastic boxes cracked, the laces tangled. It looked like a pile of garbage. Next came Bianca's handbags. There were Louis Vuitton totes and Gucci clutches. Some were fake, but some were real. They were the trophies of her selfishness, bought with money she claimed she did not have. I threw them onto a folding table I had set up near the mailbox. I was in the middle of sticking a price tag on a pair of retro Jordans when I felt a shadow fall over me. I did not need to look up to know who it was. I could smell the heavy floral perfume mixed with the scent of self-righteousness. It was Sister Jenkins. She lived 3 houses down. She was the head usher at my mother's church. She was the gatekeeper of the community gossip mill. She knew everything about everyone before they knew it themselves. She was exactly the person I was waiting for. I straightened up and smoothed my blazer. I looked at her. She was wearing a house coat and slippers, but she carried herself with the authority of a bishop. She was staring at the pile of shoes with a mixture of confusion and horror. "Sloan," she said, her voice sharp with suspicion. "What in the name of heaven is going on here? I saw your parents leaving in a taxi yesterday with enough luggage for an army, and now you are throwing their belongings on the lawn like common trash." She looked at the dumpster. She looked at the workers hauling out my mother's dining room chairs. "Is everything all right with Rosanda?" she asked. Her tone suggested that she already knew the answer was no, but she wanted the juicy details. I smiled. It was a tight, professional smile. It was the smile of a woman who was about to drop a nuclear bomb on a small village. "Everything is fine, Sister Jenkins," I said. My voice was calm and loud enough for the neighbors across the street to hear. "My mother and father and Bianca and Darius are on a vacation. A very expensive vacation. A vacation." She frowned. "Rosanda told me things were tight. She told the prayer circle that they were struggling to keep the lights on. She asked for a special offering last Sunday." I laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. "They are not struggling, Sister Jenkins. They are currently in a presidential suite on a Royal Caribbean cruise ship. They are drinking champagne and eating lobster." Sister Jenkins blinked. Her brain was trying to reconcile the image of the poor suffering Rosanda with the image of a woman on a luxury cruise. "But how?" she asked. "If they have no money, how are they paying for that?" I took a step closer to her. I lowered my voice just enough to make her lean in. I wanted her to feel like a conspirator. "They stole it," I said. She gasped. Her hand flew to her chest. "Stole it? Who did they steal from?" "Me." I let the word hang in the humid air between us. "They stole my emergency credit card," I continued, "the one I gave them for life-saving medicine. They charged $13,700 to it yesterday. They booked the trip without asking me. They laughed about it when I caught them. Sister Jenkins looked like she had swallowed a lemon. This was scandal. This was high-grade, unadulterated sin. But I was not done. I had to destroy the narrative completely. I had to make sure that when Rosanda came back, she had no sanctuary. And that is not the worst part," I said. I reached into my bag and pulled out the folder I had taken from Darius's room. I pulled out the paper with my mother's handwriting on it, the notes about adverse possession. I found this in the house. They were planning to steal this house from me, Sister Jenkins. They were consulting lawyers to use squatters' rights to take the deed because I let them live here for free. They were going to rob their own daughter blind. She stared at the paper. She recognized the handwriting. Everyone in the church choir recognized Rosanda loopy script. "Lord have mercy," she whispered. Her eyes were wide. She looked from the paper to the house to me. "Stealing from your own child. That is a curse. That is a biblical curse. It is I agreed, and that is why I am selling the house. I sold it to a developer this morning. It is being demolished tomorrow." "Demolished!" she screeched. "Everything must go," I said, gesturing to the lawn. "I have to pay off the debt they racked up in my name. I have to recoup my losses. That is why I am selling Darius's shoes." I picked up a pair of pristine Jordans. These cost $200 retail. I slapped a neon orange sticker on the toe. $5, I announced. Sister Jenkins watched in stunned silence as a group of neighborhood teenagers rode up on their bicycles. They had seen the activity. They saw the shoes. Their eyes went wide. "How much for the J's, lady?" one of the boys asked. He looked terrified to even touch them. $5 a pair, I said, or $20 for the whole box. The kid looked like he had won the lottery. He fumbled in his pocket and pulled out a crumpled $20 bill. I took it. "Take them," I said. "Take the gaming chair, too. $5. The kids swarmed the pile. It was a frenzy. They were grabbing sneakers and controllers and headsets. They were stripping Darius of his pride for pennies on the dollar. Sister Jenkins watched it all. She watched the physical dismantling of my brother-in-law, his ego. She watched the liquidation of my sister, his vanity. "This is a tragedy," she murmured. But there was a gleam in her eye. She was already composing the text messages. She was already planning the phone calls. By the time the sun went down, every single person in the congregation would know that Sister Rosanda was a thief and a liar. I turned back to her. "I know you will pray for them, Sister Jenkins," I said, my voice dripping with false sincerity. "They are going to need it. Because when they get back, they are going to be homeless, and I am cutting them off. Permanently." She nodded slowly. "You have to do what you have to do, baby. The Bible says a man who does not provide for his family is worse than an infidel, but a family that steals from their provider, well, the Lord does not look kindly on that either." She turned and walked away. Her pace was brisk. She had news to spread. She was the carrier pigeon of my vengeance. I watched her go. I felt a deep, cold satisfaction. My mother valued her reputation above everything else. She valued her standing in the church more than her relationship with me. She loved being the matriarch. I had just stripped her of her crown. When she walked into that church next Sunday, she would not be greeted with respect. She would be greeted with whispers and judgment. She would be the woman who stole from her daughter to go on a cruise. She would be a pariah. I turned back to the yard sale. The pile was shrinking fast. A man in a pickup truck had just bought my mother his dining set for $50. He was loading it into the bed of his truck. I walked over to the table with Bianca's bags. A woman was eyeing a Louis Vuitton tote. "Is this real?" she asked. It was, I said. But the person who owned it was a fake. $10. The woman handed me the money. I added it to the wad of cash in my pocket. The house was emptying out. The lawn was filling up with scavengers. The reputation of the Williams family was disintegrating in real time. I looked at the house. It looked hollow. It looked dead. Good. I checked my watch. It was almost noon. The cleaning crew was finishing up. Alvarez gave me a thumbs up from the porch. I walked over to him. "Is it empty?" I asked. "Broom clean," he said. "We took everything, even the curtains." Perfect. I looked at the pile of cash in my hand. It was not much, maybe a few $100s. It was a fraction of what they had stolen. But the money was not the point. The point was the message. I took a photo of the empty lawn where the shoes used to be. I took a photo of the empty living room. I sent them to my attorney. Then I sent a text to Kingston Price. "The property is vacant. You can bring the heavy machinery." I got into my car. I watched Sister Jenkins standing on her porch phone pressed to her ear, animatedly telling the story of the century to whoever was on the other line. The media war had begun, and I had just won the first battle without firing a single shot. I backed out of the driveway and drove away, leaving the empty shell of a house and the ruins of a reputation behind me. The sun had set over Atlanta, leaving the skyline awash in a deep purple, bruised with streaks of charcoal and indigo. From the terrace of my penthouse on the 35th floor, the city looked like a circuit board of gold and white lights, humming with an electric energy that I usually found soothing. Tonight, however, the city felt distant. My reality was focused entirely on the small, glowing rectangle of my iPhone screen. I sat on my white velvet sofa, my legs tucked underneath me. I held a glass of vintage Cabernet in one hand. The wine was rich and heavy with notes of dark cherry and oak. It was a $20 glass of wine poured from a $200 bottle. I drank it slowly, savoring the taste of something I had earned, something I had worked 80-hour weeks to afford. On my phone screen, my family was spending money they did not have to celebrate a life they did not deserve. I opened Instagram. I did not have to search for them. The algorithm knew exactly who I was stalking. My sister Bianca was live. The notification bar at the top of the screen pulse read, "Bianca is blessed is live now." I tapped the screen. The volume was already up, and the sound of steel drums and ocean wind filled my silent living room. Bianca's face filled the frame. She was glowing. Her skin was perfectly highlighted, and she was wearing a pair of oversized Gucci sunglasses that I knew for a fact cost $500. She pushed them up onto her head, revealing eyes that were bright with manic excitement and champagne. "Hey guys!" she squealed into the camera, her voice pitched high for her followers. "We just checked into the suite and oh my God, you have to see this. I am literally shaking. This is what winning looks like." She spun the camera around. The room was massive. It was the royal suite at the Atlantis. I recognized the layout immediately because I had seen the booking confirmation in my email before I marked it as fraud. There were marble floors and floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the dark, churning ocean. There was a dining table set for 4, with white linens and crystal goblets. There was a living area with plush cream sofas that looked soft enough to swallow you whole. Bianca walked through the room, narrating her own theft. "Look at this view," she shouted, walking out onto the balcony. "We are living our best life, y'all. No stress, no drama, just blessings." She turned the camera back to the room. My mother, Rosanda, was sitting on one of the sofas holding a glass of champagne. She was wearing a silk caftan that I recognized from a boutique in Buckhead. It cost $300. She waved at the camera, looking like a queen on her throne. "Hi, everyone," Rosanda called out, her voice slurring slightly. "We are just enjoying the fruits of our labor. God is good. The fruits of whose labor I thought taking a sip of my wine. Not yours, mother. You haven't worked a day in 20 years. Those are the fruits of my labor. You are just the parasites eating the harvest." Then the camera panned to Darius. My brother-in-law, the man who had drilled holes in my walls and stolen my father's identity. He was standing by the wet bar popping the cork on a bottle of Dom Perignon. The bottle alone cost $300. He was wearing a white linen shirt unbuttoned to his sternum, trying desperately to look like a music video star. "Pop bottles!" Darius shouted, spraying a little foam onto the carpet. "We up right now. Cannot hear the haters from the penthouse." Bianca laughed a cruel, delighted sound. She flipped the camera back to herself. "That is right, baby," she said, winking. "We are unbothered. Some people are back in Atlanta working their little 9-to-5 jobs, being miserable and bitter. But we are out here. We are international." She posted a caption over the live feed, "Living our best life, ignoring the jealous haters at home. Hashtag blessed, hashtag family, first, hashtag luxury." I stared at the word jealous. They truly believed that. They believed I was sitting in my apartment crying because I was not with them. They believed my anger came from envy, not from the violation of my trust. They thought they had outsmarted me. They thought that because they had the physical card and they were on the ship, they had won. They did not understand how credit works. They did not understand that a card is just a plastic key, and I had already changed the locks. I watched as they clinked their glasses. I watched as my father, Elvin, wandered into the frame looking slightly lost, but happy, holding a plate of chocolate-covered strawberries. They looked like a happy, wealthy family enjoying a well-deserved break. It was a perfect illusion, and like all illusions, it was fragile. I looked at the time on my phone. It was 7:30 in the evening. In the Bahamas, it was the same time. They had early dinner reservations at Nobu, the high-end Japanese restaurant inside the resort. I knew this because I had seen the itinerary in the confirmation email. They were about to go downstairs. They were about to order Wagyu beef and lobster tempura, and more of that expensive champagne. They were going to rack up a bill that would easily hit 4 figures, and then the check would come. I felt a cold calm settle over me. It was the same feeling I got right before I handed a district attorney the final piece of evidence that would send a white-collar criminal to prison. It was the feeling of absolute control. I did not feel sad for them. I did not feel a flicker of guilt. I looked at Bianca's smiling face on the screen, her teeth white and perfect, her ignorance total. "Enjoy the champagne." "Bianca," I whispered to the empty room, "drink it fast, because the hangover is going to be brutal." I closed the app. I did not need to watch anymore. I knew what happened next. The bomb was already armed. The timer was ticking down. I took another sip of my wine. It tasted like justice. The digital clock on my stainless steel oven read 7:45. In the Bahamas, the sun had dipped below the horizon, leaving a bruised purple sky over the ocean. My family was seated at the best table in the resort's signature seafood restaurant. I knew this because 10 minutes ago, Bianca had posted a photo of a seafood tower that cost more than my monthly car insurance. They were laughing. They were drinking vintage champagne. They were ordering Wagyu beef and lobster tails with the reckless abandon of people who believe they have won the lottery. They were about to find out that the lottery ticket was a forgery. I sat at my kitchen island with my phone in one hand and a glass of wine in the other. I did not feel the jittery nerves of anticipation. I felt the cold, steady pulse of execution. I tapped the number for the Chase Sapphire concierge line. I was a Diamond member. They answered on the first ring. "Thank you for calling Chase Sapphire. This is Michael. How can I assist you today, Ms. King?" "Hello, Michael." My voice was calm. It was professional. It was the voice I used when I was explaining to a jury exactly how a CFO had embezzled millions. "I have a situation. I believe my card has been compromised. I am currently in Atlanta, but I am seeing alerts for significant charges in the Bahamas. I did not authorize these transactions." "Oh, I am so sorry to hear that, Ms. King." Michael sounded genuinely alarmed. "Let me pull up your account." "Yes, I see them. $13,700 to Royal Caribbean, $500 at the Atlantis Spa, $800 at Nobu. Those are fraudulent," I said. "I need you to freeze the card immediately. Mark them all as unauthorized. Consider it done. The card is now inactive. I see there is a secondary card on the account issued to an Elvin Williams. Do you want me to keep that one active for emergencies?" "No," I said. "Freeze that one too. I believe his information was compromised in the same breach. Lock everything down, Michael. I want a total financial blackout." "Understood. Both cards are frozen. No further charges will be approved. We will launch an investigation into the fraud." "Thank you, Michael." I hung up the phone. It was done. The connection was severed. The money was gone. I closed my eyes and leaned back against the marble counter. I did not need to be in the restaurant to know exactly what was happening. I could see it played out in my mind like a high-definition movie. The waiter was approaching their table. He was wearing a crisp white jacket and holding a black leather folder. He was smiling that polite, deferential smile reserved for big spenders. He placed the folder on the table. The bill was likely over $1,000. My mother, Rosanda, would wave a dismissive hand. "Put it on the room," she would say, her voice loud enough for the neighboring tables to hear. She loved the performance of wealth. The waiter would nod and walk away. He would go to the terminal. He would swipe the card linked to the room, and then the smile would vanish. The machine would beep. A harsh, flat sound. Declined. He would try again. Declined. He would walk back to the table. The deference would be gone. His posture would be stiffer. He would lean in close, not to be discreet, but to be firm. "I am sorry, Mom," he would say. "The card has been declined." Rosanda would laugh. A nervous, high-pitched titter. "That is impossible. It is a platinum card. Try it again. We have tried it 3 times, Mom. You need to provide another form of payment." The table would grow quiet. The laughter would die. Darius would look at Tiana. Tiana would look at her mother. The panic would start to prickle at the back of their necks. "Elvin," my father would try to save the day. He would reach for his wallet. His hands would be shaking slightly. He would pull out the supplementary card I had given him, the one I had just frozen. "Here, use this one," he would say, puffing out his chest. "My daughter handles my finances. It must be a glitch." The waiter would take it. He would walk away. He would come back 2 minutes later. "This one is declined as well, sir." Now the manager would come. He would not be smiling. He would be a serious man in a dark suit with a headset. He would stand by the table, flanked by 2 large security guards. "Folks, we have a problem," he would say. "We have received notification that the payment method for your suite has been revoked. We have an outstanding balance of $14,000 for the room and $2,000 for incidentals. We need payment immediately." Tiana would start to cry. It would be her go-to defense mechanism, tears and hysteria. She would wail that this was a mistake. She would scream that they were VIPs. Darius would get aggressive. He would stand up and shout, "Do you know who we are? We are the Williams family." The manager would not care. He would look at them with cold, dead eyes. "If you cannot pay, you will need to vacate the premises immediately. We will contact the local authorities if the bill is not settled." My mother would try to use her authority. She would demand to speak to the owner. She would threaten to sue, but her voice would crack. She would realize that for the first time in 20 years, she had no safety net. She had no one to bail her out. The visualization was so vivid I could almost taste the fear in the air. But I was not done. I opened my eyes. I picked up my phone again. They were trapped on an island with no money. Their first instinct would be to call family. They would call my aunts. They would call my uncles. They would call my cousins. They would spin a sob story about being robbed. They would beg for money to get home. I could not let that happen. I opened my contacts list. I selected a group I had created years ago but never used. Extended family. It included everyone. Aunt Sarah, Uncle Marcus, Cousin David, even the pastor at my mother's church. I typed out a message. "Urgent family alert. My identity has been compromised, and my financial information has been stolen. The hackers have access to my family contact list. If you receive any calls or texts from my parents or my sister claiming they are stuck overseas and need money, please ignore them. It is a scam. Do not send money. I am working with the FBI to resolve this. I read it over. It was perfect. It was plausible. It protected me, and it cut off their last line of retreat. I hit send. The message swooshed away. Within seconds, my phone buzzed with replies. "Oh my God, Sloan, thank you for telling us. We will block any numbers. Praying for you, baby girl." I smiled. I took another sip of wine. They were alone. They were broke. They were stranded. And nobody was coming to save them. The trap was snapped shut. The cage was locked. And I was the one holding the key. The rain in Atlanta that night was torrential. It fell in heavy, relentless sheets that turned the asphalt of Maple Drive into a slick black river. I sat in my Porsche Panamera parked 3 houses down under the deep shadow of an old oak tree. The engine was off. The interior was silent. I watched the windshield wipers slice back and forth, clearing the view of the stage I had set. I had been waiting for 2 hours. I knew their flight schedule because I had tracked it. I knew they had landed at Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport at 11:30 at night. I knew they had to wait 40 minutes for their luggage because the budget airline they were forced to fly was notorious for delays. It had been 3 days since I dropped the nuclear bomb on their vacation. 3 days of hell for the Williams family. I imagined their journey. They had been escorted off the ship like criminals. They had been stranded on a dock in the Bahamas with maxed-out credit cards and declining bank balances. They had to scrape together the cash they had on hand just to buy tickets on a discount carrier with 3 layovers. They had flown from Nassau to Miami, then from Miami to Charlotte, and finally from Charlotte to Atlanta. They were exhausted, they were humiliated, and they were furious. I saw the headlights before I saw the car. A yellow taxi rattled down the street. It was moving too fast for the weather, splashing water onto the sidewalks. It looked like a desperate vehicle carrying desperate people. I sat up straighter in my leather seat. My heartbeat remained steady. This was the moment of impact. The taxi slowed down as it approached number 124. I could see the silhouette of 4 people crammed into the back seat. They were arguing. I could see hands waving. I could see heads turning. They were likely rehearsing their speeches. They were planning to storm into the house and drag me out of bed. They were going to scream at me for embarrassing them. They were going to demand that I fix this immediately. They were going to play the victim card, the guilt card, and the family card all at once. They expected to see the porch light on. They expected to see the white colonial house standing tall and proud. They expected to use their keys to unlock the front door and reclaim their territory. The taxi came to a screeching halt. The headlights cut through the darkness and illuminated the property. It was not a house anymore. It was a skeleton. The demolition crew had been efficient. In 48 hours, they had stripped the structure down to its bones. The roof was gone, leaving the rafters exposed to the pouring rain like the ribs of a decaying carcass. The front wall of the living room had been completely removed. The siding was gone. The windows were gone. Where the manicured lawn used to be, there was now a churned sea of red Georgia clay and mud. And sitting right in the middle of what used to be the living room floor was a massive yellow bulldozer. Its steel tracks were buried deep in the dirt. Its giant metal bucket was resting on the ground like a sleeping beast. The taxi sat there idling. No one moved. The image before them was so incomprehensible that their brains refused to process it. They were looking for a home, and they had found a war zone. Then the back door of the taxi flew open. Darius was the first one out. He stepped straight into a puddle of mud, ruining whatever shoes he had managed to salvage. He did not seem to notice. He ran toward the property. The rain soaked his white linen shirt, instantly making it cling to his skin. He stopped at the edge of the driveway. He stopped because there was a fence. Kingston Price was a man of his word. He had erected a 6-foot-tall chain-link fence around the entire perimeter of the property. It was topped with barbed wire. It was a fortress. Darius gripped the chain-link fence with both hands. He shook it violently. He was screaming something, but the sound of the rain and the thunder drowned him out. He looked like a prisoner trying to escape a cage. Then Bianca stepped out. She was holding a Louis Vuitton bag over her head to shield herself from the rain. She took 2 steps and stopped. She dropped the bag. It fell into the mud. She brought her hands to her face. I could see her body shaking. She was not screaming. She was freezing. The reality of the world she lived in had just shattered. Her bedroom was gone. Her closet was gone. Her sanctuary was a pile of wet lumber. My parents climbed out slowly. Elvin looked old. He looked smaller than I had ever seen him. He stood by the taxi staring at the bulldozer. He looked confused, as if he had been dropped onto the wrong planet. Rosanda was the last to emerge. She was wearing a straw hat from the cruise and a bright floral dress that looked grotesque against the gray backdrop of the storm. She marched up to the fence next to Darius. She pointed a finger at the house. She was shouting at the empty air. She was demanding to speak to the manager. She was trying to gaslight a pile of bricks. But the bricks did not care. Then the taxi driver honked his horn. He wanted his fare. He did not care about their tragedy. He just wanted to get paid and get out of the rain. Elvin turned back to the driver, fumbling in his pockets. I watched him pull out a few crumpled bills. It was likely the last of their cash. The taxi drove away, leaving them standing in the rain on the sidewalk. They were huddled together, shivering, wet, and homeless. Lightning flashed overhead, illuminating the scene in a stark white light. The flash lit up a large metal sign that had been bolted to the front of the chain-link fence. It was white with bold red lettering. It was the only clean thing on the entire lot. Property of Kingston Price Development, construction site. No trespassing. Violators will be prosecuted. Rosanda stared at the sign. She read the name. Kingston Price. She knew the name. Everyone in Atlanta knew the name. He was not family. He was not a friend. He was a corporation. She turned around and looked at the street. She looked left. She looked right. She was looking for me. She realized finally that I was not inside. I was not waiting in the kitchen to apologize. I was not there to fix it. I was the one who had swung the wrecking ball. I watched Darius kick the fence. He slipped in the mud and fell onto his knees. He stayed there punching the wet ground. It was pathetic. It was the tantrum of a man who had never been told no in his entire life. I reached for the door handle of my Porsche. The leather was cool under my fingertips. The show was over. It was time for the curtain call. I pushed the door open and stepped out into the rain. I opened my black umbrella. The sound of the rain hitting the fabric was a soft drum roll. I walked down the sidewalk toward them. My heels clicked on the wet concrete, a rhythmic sound of approaching judgment. They did not see me until I was 10 feet away. Bianca saw me first. Her eyes went wide. She grabbed her mother's arm. Rosanda turned. Darius scrambled to his feet, wiping mud from his face. Elvin looked up. They stood in a line against the fence, wet, shivering, broken. I stopped. I stood under my umbrella, perfectly dry, perfectly composed. I looked at the ruin behind them. Then I looked at them. "Welcome home," I said. My voice was not loud, but it cut through the rain like a razor blade. The shock on their faces was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. The scene before me was not just a family breakdown. It was a descent into madness. The shock of seeing the skeletal remains of the house had snapped the last fragile thread of sanity, holding my sister and brother-in-law together. Bianca was no longer the poised influencer she pretended to be on Instagram. She was feral. She was screaming a high-pitched sound that tore through the heavy rain like a siren. My things are in there," she shrieked. She threw herself at the chain-link fence. Her fingers clawed at the metal mesh. She tried to climb it. She tried to find a foothold in the wet mud, but her expensive heels kept slipping. She looked like a trapped animal. Her hair, which she had spent hundreds of dollars styling for the trip, was plastered to her skull. Her makeup ran in dark rivers down her face. "I need my bags. Open the gate. Open it." She was hysterical. She truly believed that her collection of handbags and shoes was still inside the wreckage waiting for her. She could not accept that they had been sold to the neighborhood teenagers for pennies. Darius was worse. His rage was physical. He was a man who had built his entire identity on a foundation of lies and unearned swagger. Seeing the bulldozer sitting in the middle of his living room was an insult he could not process. He bent down and scrabbled in the mud. His hands closed around a jagged piece of brick that had once been part of the front porch. He let out a roar, a guttural sound of pure impotence. He hurled the brick with all his strength. It struck the yellow steel blade of the bulldozer with a loud clang. The sound echoed in the night. He did it again. He picked up another stone, another brick. He was throwing debris at a 20-ton machine. He was trying to fight the demolition with his bare hands. "I am going to kill him!" Darius screamed, his voice cracking. "I am going to kill whoever did this. This is my house. This is my castle." Lights flickered on in the houses nearby. Sister Jenkins pushed her curtains aside. I could see the silhouette of Mr. Johnson across the street, standing on his porch with his phone to his ear. They were calling the police. They were watching the fall of the Roman Empire from the safety of their dry living rooms. It was time. I pressed the button on my dashboard. The engine of my new Porsche Panamera growled. It was a deep, throaty sound that commanded attention. I shifted into drive and rolled the car forward slowly. The tires crunched on the wet pavement. I pulled up to the curb right behind the taxi that had abandoned them. The bright LED headlights of my car swept across them like a spotlight on a prison yard. They froze. They shielded their eyes from the glare. I turned off the engine. I opened the door. I stepped out into the rain. I pressed the button on my black umbrella, and it snapped open with a crisp, efficient sound. I was wearing a black trench coat and waterproof boots. I was dry. I was warm. I was calm. I walked toward them. Sloane. The name was a gasp from my mother's lips. She stared at me. She stared at the car behind me. It was a $150,000 machine. It was the car she had always told me was a waste of money. It was the car I bought with the proceeds from selling the roof over her head. "You!" Rosanda whispered. Then the shock turned into fury. It was instant. Her face twisted into a mask of ugly hate. She lunged at me. She moved faster than I had seen her move in 20 years. "You devil!" she screamed. She raised her hand. She aimed a slap directly at my face. She wanted to hurt me. She wanted to punish the child who had dared to bite the hand that did not feed her. I did not flinch. I did not step back. I simply looked at her. Her hand stopped inches from my face. She stopped because she saw something in my eyes that she had never seen before. She saw a complete absence of fear. She saw a stranger. "What did you do?" She hissed, shaking with rage. "What did you do to my house? Your house?" I asked. My voice was level. It was the voice of a judge reading a verdict. I reached into the inside pocket of my coat. I pulled out a folded document. It was a copy of the deed transfer. I held it up. The paper was protected by a plastic sleeve so the rain would not ruin the evidence. "Show me the deed, Mother. Show me where your name is on the title. Show me the mortgage payments you made. Show me the property tax receipts." She stammered. She sputtered. "We have rights. We have lived here for 3 years. We are family." "You were guests," I corrected her. "You were guests who overstayed your welcome. You were guests who stole from your host." I took a step forward, forcing her to take a step back into a puddle. "You charged $13,700 to my card for a vacation I did not approve. You tried to use adverse possession laws to steal this property from me while I paid the bills." Rosanda went pale. She realized I knew. She looked at Elvin for support, but my father was staring at the ground, broken and silent. "So I liquidated the asset I said. I sold the house yesterday. I used the money to pay off the credit card bill you ran up. And I used the rest to buy that car." I pointed to the Porsche gleaming in the streetlight. "I traded a nest of Vipers for a German engine. I think I got the better deal." "You sold our home!" Bianca screamed. She ran over to us, her face streaked with mascara. "Where are we supposed to sleep? Where are my clothes?" "Your clothes were sold on the front lawn yesterday," I said coldly. "The neighborhood kids seem to be enjoying them. As for where you sleep, I suggest you check the local shelters. Or maybe you can sleep on the cruise ship." "Oh, wait. They kicked you off, you bitch." The voice came from behind me. It was low and dangerous. I turned. Darius was standing there. His chest was heaving. His eyes were bloodshot and wild. He looked deranged. The humiliation of the last 3 days had boiled over. He had lost his gaming room. He had lost his lazy lifestyle. He had lost his identity as the big man on campus. And I was the reason. "You think you are smart, don't you?" he snarled. "You think you can just throw us out like trash." "You are trash, Darius," I said. "You are a parasite who stole my father's identity to fund your pathetic lifestyle. I know about the loans. I know about the $40,000 in debt you racked up in Elvin's name." Darius froze. His eyes darted to Elvin. My father looked up slowly, his face registering the shock of this new betrayal. "You told him!" Darius roared. He lost all control. He forgot where he was. He forgot who I was. He just saw a target. He lunged. He pulled back his fist. He was going to hit me. He was going to beat the truth out of existence. "Sloan, look out!" my father shouted. But I did not move. I did not need to. From the shadows of the large oak tree near my car, a figure emerged. He moved with a speed that defied his size. It was a man named Marcus, a private security contractor I had hired 6 hours ago. He was 6 feet 4 inches of solid muscle. He was a former linebacker, and he did not like men who hit women. Just as Darius was about to strike, Marcus hit him. It was a tackle that would have made the NFL highlight reel. Marcus slammed into Darius with the force of a freight train. They hit the wet ground with a sickening thud. Darius's breath left his body in a wheezing gasp. Marcus pinned him instantly, twisting Darius's arm behind his back until he cried out in pain. "Stay down!" Marcus growled. Darius writhed in the mud. "Get off me! Get off me!" Then the flashing blue lights appeared at the end of the street. The neighbors had called. The police were here. 2 squad cars pulled up to the curb, their sirens cutting out, but their lights spinning in a dizzying rhythm of red and blue. 3 officers stepped out. They saw the scene. A man pinned on the ground, a demolished house, a screaming woman. "Police! Everybody stay where you are!" One of the officers shouted, his hand resting on his holster. "Officer!" I called out calmly. "I am the property owner as representative. This man attempted to assault me. My security guard detained him. The officer walked over, shining his flashlight on Darius. "Let him up slowly," the officer ordered Marcus. Marcus stepped back, raising his hands to show he was complying. Darius scrambled to his knees, coughing and spitting mud. And that was when it happened. As Darius struggled to stand, something fell out of the inside pocket of his soaked linen jacket. It was a small plastic baggie. It landed in a puddle right in the beam of the officer's flashlight. The baggie contained a white crystalline substance. It was not sugar. It was not salt. It was crystal methamphetamine. Darius had brought it for the cruise. He had intended to party hard. He had forgotten it was in his pocket during the chaos of the eviction from the ship and the flight home. The officer looked at the bag. He looked at Darius. "Well, well, well," the officer said. "What do we have here?" Darius looked down. His eyes bulged. "No, that is not mine. She planted it. She planted it." He pointed a shaking finger at me. I stood under my umbrella 10 feet away. I had never touched him. The officer grabbed Darius's arm. He spun him around. He pulled a pair of metal handcuffs from his belt. "You have the right to remain silent," the officer recited as the cold steel clicked around Darius's wrists. "No," Bianca screamed. "Darius, no!" She tried to run to him, but a second officer stepped in her path. "Ma'am, step back. Step back or you will be joining him." Darius was crying now. The tough guy act was gone. He was sobbing like a child. "Elvin, please, tell them I am a good guy." My father Elvin stood there in the rain. He looked at the son-in-law who had stolen his name. He looked at the loans I had told him about. He looked at the drugs. He turned his back on Darius. I watched as the police dragged Darius toward the patrol car. He was kicking and screaming, pleading for mercy. I looked at my mother. Rosanda was frozen in horror. Her precious golden son-in-law was being arrested for assault and possession of a controlled substance. Her reputation was not just dead, it was buried. I closed my umbrella. The rain felt good on my face now. It felt like a baptism. I looked at the officer as he shoved Darius into the back seat. "Officer," I said, "I would like to press full charges for the assault, and I have evidence of identity theft I would like to submit to the detectives tomorrow." "We will be in touch, ma'am," the officer said, touching the brim of his hat. I turned back to my family, to the wreckage of what we used to be. "The party is over," I said, "and you do not have a home to go back to." I turned and walked back to my Porsche. I did not run. I did not look back. I got in. I started the engine. I drove away, leaving them in the dark, leaving them in the rain, leaving them with nothing but the consequences of their own choices. The police cruiser turned the corner and vanished into the night, leaving only the fading echo of sirens hanging in the humid air. My family stood on the sidewalk, drenched and shivering. They looked like refugees from a war they had started. Across the street, I saw the glow of cell phone screens. Sister Jenkins was standing on her porch holding her phone up, broadcasting the destruction of the Williams dynasty to her entire prayer circle. The comments section was likely already burning with judgment. The reputation my mother had spent decades curating was destroyed in minutes. Then my father stumbled. Elvin grabbed his left arm. His face turned an ashen gray color under the streetlights. He did not scream. He simply crumpled into the wet mud like a discarded puppet. "Dad!" Bianca screamed, dropping to her knees beside him. I watched from under my umbrella. I saw the panic in his eyes. It was not a fatal blow, but it was the body reacting to the catastrophic stress of losing everything. 2 hours later, I stood in the fluorescent glare of the emergency room waiting area at Grady Memorial. The air smelled of antiseptic and despair. My mother sat in a plastic orange chair, her floral cruise dress stained with mud and tears. She looked up at me. Her eyes were red and swollen. "Sloan," she choked out. "They say he is stable. It was a mild angina attack brought on by shock, but they need a deposit for admission. We have nothing. The cards are frozen. You have to help him. He is your father." I looked at her. I felt a flicker of pity, but it was distant, like watching a sad movie on a plane. I walked to the billing counter. I pulled out my black Amex card. "I will pay for the emergency stabilization," I told the nurse. "That is all." I swiped the card. $3,500. It was a lot of money, but it was the price of a clean break. I walked back to Rosanda. I did not sit down. I reached into my bag and pulled out a thick manila envelope. I held it out to her. She reached for it trembling, thinking it was cash or a check. It was neither. I watched her open it. I watched her eyes widen as she saw the loan applications with Elvina's name and Darius's email address. I watched her read the credit report, showing $40,000 in defaulted debt. And finally, I watched her read the legal document I had drafted titled, Notice of Financial Severance. That is the truth, Mother, I said, my voice low and hard. Darius stole. Dad is identity. He took out $40,000 in loans in Dad's name to buy his toys. That is why you are broke. Not because of me, but because you let a wolf live in your house and you fed him. She looked up at me, her mouth opening and closing wordlessly. And the other paper is a legal notice. I continued. I am severing all financial ties. I paid the hospital bill tonight. That is the severance package. Do not call me for bail money for Darius. Do not call me for rent. Do not call me when the lights go out. You are on your own. I turned my back on her. I walked toward the automatic doors. I walked out into the cool night air, leaving her sitting there with an envelope full of betrayal and a future full of silence. 1 month had passed since the night of the rain and the demolition. The morning sun poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my penthouse apartment, creating pools of golden light on the white marble floor. I sat at the kitchen island wearing a silk robe that cost $500. I held a mug of freshly brewed Ethiopian coffee in my hands. The steam rose in delicate swirls, vanishing into the cool air conditioning. The silence in the apartment was absolute. It was not the silence of loneliness. It was the silence of peace. It was the expensive silence of a life that had been scrubbed clean of drama and toxicity. I took a sip of the coffee. It was rich and complex. It tasted like freedom. I picked up my iPad and scrolled through the local news. I did not look for news about my family, but in a city like Atlanta, word traveled fast. Especially when Sister Jenkins was the primary news anchor. I knew exactly where they were. My parents and Bianca were currently residing at the Starlight Motel on the outskirts of the city. It was a place known for charging by the hour and having stains on the carpet that could not be identified. They were squeezed into a single room with 2 double beds, room 112. Bianca was no longer living her best life on Instagram. Her account had been deactivated. She was currently working the breakfast shift at a 24-hour diner off the interstate. She was serving grits and eggs to truck drivers for minimum wage. She was learning the value of $1 the hard way. Darius was in a much worse situation. He was currently a resident of the Fulton County Jail. Without the money for a high-powered attorney, he was relying on a public defender who had 300 other cases. The charges against him for assault and possession were serious. He was facing a mandatory minimum sentence. He was going to have a long time to think about the holes he drilled in my walls. My phone vibrated on the marble counter, breaking my reverie. I looked at the screen. It was an unknown number. The area code was local. I knew who it was. My mother, Rosanda, had been blocked on every platform. She had been blocked on my phone. She had been blocked on my email. But she was persistent. She was likely calling from the motel front desk or a burner phone she had bought at a gas station. She was calling to beg. She was calling to guilt trip. She was calling to ask for just one more chance. I stared at the vibrating phone. A month ago, my heart would have raced. A month ago, I would have felt the crushing weight of obligation. I would have answered. I would have listened to her cry. I would have opened my wallet to make the pain stop. But that version of Sloane was dead. She had been buried under the rubble of the house on Maple Drive. I did not feel anger. I did not feel sadness. I felt a mild indifference. It was like looking at a telemarketer call. I smiled. It was a small, genuine smile. I reached out with a manicured finger and pressed the red button. Decline. The vibrating stopped. The screen went dark. The connection was severed. I finished my coffee and placed the mug in the sink. I walked to the foyer and grabbed my keys. The heavy weight of the Porsche fob felt good in my palm. I had a meeting in 30 minutes. Kingston Price and I were discussing a new partnership. He had been impressed by my ruthlessness during the sale of the house. He wanted me to consult on his distressed asset acquisitions. He wanted a partner who understood numbers and who was not afraid to pull the trigger. I checked my reflection in the mirror by the door. My suit was sharp. My eyes were clear. I looked like a woman who owned her destiny. I walked out the door and locked it behind me. I took the elevator down to the private garage. My new Porsche Panamera was waiting in its reserved spot, gleaming under the fluorescent lights. I got in and started the engine. The roar of the motor echoed off the concrete walls. I pulled out onto Peachtree Street. The city of Atlanta spread out before me, shining and full of promise. I rolled down the window and let the wind catch my hair. I had lost a house. I had lost a family. But as I accelerated onto the highway, leaving the ghosts of my past in the rearview mirror, I realized something profound. I had not just taken back my money, I had taken back my life. And the view from the driver's seat was magnificent. Blood makes you related, but loyalty makes you family. For years I allowed guilt to be the currency of my relationships, believing that being a good daughter meant setting myself on fire to keep them warm. But I learned that you cannot save people who are addicted to their own entitlement. By selling that house, I didn't just liquidate an asset, I bought my freedom. Boundaries are not punishments, they are the walls of your own self-respect. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is let people face the consequences of their own actions alone.